I'm Barbara O'Connor. Welcome to another edition of the Simsbury Woman. The last few years have presented some challenging changes for me and my family. We've lost a number of people who were very close to us, and we also saw our children leave home to begin their own independent lives. We have felt both very deep sadness and great happiness. Of course, I understand that nothing I went through was particularly unique to me and my family. We all face changes of many types at every stage of our lives. These changes can present particular issues for women, and for that reason, my conversation today is with someone who's been on this program before. Her expertise and counsel are worth reviewing and definitely worth expanding in a new discussion. Susan Levine has a counseling practice, Women Reshaping Lives. Susan, thanks for joining me today. I'm so glad that you could come and talk about the things that you have talked about before when Shannon was here, and just actually what we're going to do is kind of review, renew, and reshape. Review some of the things that you talked about with Shannon, I guess it was about 2 years ago, actually, and renew some of them, expand upon some of them to some different stages, and then talk about the resilience and reshaping that we all go through all the time. I think the first thing that would help is to review your qualifications and the transitions you went through to get into your counseling practice.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a thrill to be back here today and enjoying talking with you and talking about women in transition. Women Reshaping Lives, my counseling practice, is a part of my own transition. It is what I decided to do in my retirement. But it was also part of a string of all of the things I had done before. And one of the things I've found about transition is that we build and we grow on all that we have been to where we're going to be. And so when I thought of what I wanted to do in retirement, I drew upon my experiences as teacher, as clergy, as counselor, and I had this wonderful opportunity to vision, who do I want to counsel in this time of my life? And I thought, women, I've always connected with women and women's issues. And then I thought of the transitions in my life. Some of them very, very hard. And I thought of the support system that I had around me and the inner resources that I found out that I had, that I had to draw upon to get through. And I thought, I want to work with women in transition to help them to find where they want to go to.
You know, the one thing that, as I was thinking about this conversation today, I know that the whole idea of women in transition is not new. I remember I think it was in college or right after I got out of college, reading Gail Sheehy's passages and talking about that type of, the women in transition. You don't seem to hear as much about it for men, but yet they go through similar issues all the time, and I don't know if that can be attributed to the lack of expression that is more that men don't cry, that kind of attitude, that they don't talk about it as much, or if it has more to do with the fact that you add like the physical changes to the hormonal changes to the nurturing role that we have. Is that why, or does that contribute to maybe the fact that women talk about it more and wonder about it? Have you ever thought about
I think
that kind
women
of a thing?
have different relational styles than men. Some of it is what we're used to in the stereotypes. The man as being that strong, macho person who does keep what they're feeling inside. And women as the nurturers, the people who take care of everyone, but who also relate, who need to form community around themselves to talk about what they're feeling. So that's part of it. I think some of those stereotypes are changing in today's world.
Wouldn't you say, I think we probably went through things at, similar times where if both spouses are working, it's the female who would usually be the one with, okay, well, who's going to pick up the kids and who's going to do this and that, as opposed to I can remember my husband would just go to work, and I'd be like, well, wait a minute, so-and-so has to go to the doctor's, or I just got a call from the daycare center, or that. It was usually the women's responsibility to do that, and there was a kind of a separate thing that I think that some of that balancing may be changing. I was reading over the weekend a thing about paternity leave at some big company where it was, and they were really encouraging the fathers to take, actually, I think they had 10 weeks of paid paternity leave, which, it sounded fantastic that they would encourage something like that. Because I think that we've got to see everybody be involved in the family structure as opposed to just the woman in that way. But one thing that you talked about with Shannon a couple of years ago that really struck me was the idea of developing your own self-acceptance and celebrating yourself. I really liked that theme. And you talked about all the different pressures on women that can be negative when we're thinking about that. And I think it might be good to talk a little bit about that a little bit more, if you could,
Sure,
about how we develop that strength to celebrate ourselves.
Well, I think first of all, it's giving ourselves permission to celebrate ourselves. Part of the stereotype that we're talking about is a woman as a nurturer, but also as someone who always does for others. But that the idea of doing for oneself, taking care of oneself, is somehow selfish or takes away from taking care of husband, children, parents, work, volunteer responsibilities. And that doesn't create a sense of inner balance for women. So we have these expectations in our heads. We kind of absorb them through all of our being and how we look at ourselves, that I'm supposed to be, I should be, this whole body of shoulds. And they are roadblocks to our being not only who we are, but who we would like to be. That when we can look inside and kind of ground ourselves in just who we are. And that includes not only the things we like, allowing those things, but the things that maybe we're not so fond of. And see that this is all of who I am. And look at what I've learned. And look what I have yet to learn. And we're all kind of a work in progress. So that I always see our evolution is the growing. In fact, you mentioned Gail Sheehy before, and I'm very fond of a quote of hers that says, if we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't living. And so that's our challenge.
Yeah.
And to do that, we have to know ourselves.
I was thinking, too, of some very strong women I've known. And actually, when I looked at my own mother, who raised 8 children, and my mother-in-law, who raised 5 children, I was thinking about them in terms of what they did as far as taking care of themselves. I think it consisted of going to the hairdresser maybe once a week, and their faith and spirituality that was very important to both of them. When I think now of how we as a society talk about the need for being mindful of things, and whether it's meditation or even really yoga as a practice, not just the exercise, but the whole peace and inner peace that you get. I guess in some ways other generations did that too, except they didn't necessarily call it that. It may have been more of a spiritual thing for them, or just their faith and that. Because I can remember something being at some sort of crossroads in my life, and talking about things, and my mother said, like, don't overthink it, just do it. And you get to the point where it's like, do something even if it's wrong, just do it and get it going. When I think about for myself with looking at what I want to keep or what I want to change in that, I don't want to get into that paralysis by analysis sort of situation. That I wonder how we strike that balance between doing and thinking and just becoming one strong individual.
I think part of it is looking at what are our expectations. Do we expect ourselves not to fail? Do we expect ourselves to be perfect? Well, in that case, we might be, using that analysis to make sure that we make sure everything is in that structured place so that we're not going to fail. But we don't control that.
Yeah.
And that's part of it, that looking at what's within our control and what's not within our control.
I think 3 of the easiest words to say and the hardest to do are let it go. I mean, even before the whole song thing and all that. But, you can drive yourself crazy with guilt, with, sometimes you make a decision for your family and maybe it doesn't turn out the way you thought it was going to, but you made it based on what you thought at the time was the right decision. And I mean, I don't know if we ever really get to a total point where we can say, where we really accept ourselves and we don't beat ourselves up.
Well, I don't think we do either. I don't think I think that's an expectation, actually, that we're going to get to a place where, I don't beat myself up. I don't do that anymore. I've learned my lesson.
Yeah.
I think it's more a matter of recognizing when we want to go there. When that old habit, that old familiar memory of placing such harsh, really hard expectations on ourselves is sitting on our shoulder.
Yeah.
And then saying, I see you're here, you're back. It's an old message, sometimes a self-defeating message. But by getting to know it and understand it, we give ourselves choices. And the choice is, do I want to follow that message? Is this what I want to do to myself? Do I want to make myself feel guilty over something that's not mine, not in my control, doesn't really solve anything or do anything, not only for myself, but for anybody else? Or do I want to choose to do something else? And that's the difference. And sometimes we make that choice to take a risk and to let something go. And sometimes we don't.
Yeah. I think women, too, have tended to define themselves based on roles outside of themselves. Their career, whose parent they are, so many times when you know people as who their child is, as opposed to because their child matches your child or whatever, that you know them, that we go through the changes where whether you're you're a trailing spouse, your husband gets transferred and you have to move. You're up, he's got a career place and he's got friends all set, and then you come with, a truckload of kids and goods, and you have to start all over again. I think that's something that can be daunting to women. I know it's something that can be daunting to women, but yeah, I think it's something that can also build strength for themselves and their family to kind of discover what they can do without somebody else doing it for them.
Anytime we look inside ourselves and discover our spirit of resiliency and learn what our coping skills are, that we have coping skills, that we can get ourselves through a tough time, whether it's a move, loss of a loved one, a major life transition such as divorce or retirement, or even dealing with aging. When we can do that, and we gather support system around us to help us with that, we learn a lot about, oh, look at what I can do. I do have the strength to do it. No, it was hard, and it is hard. But through that difficulty, the challenge, there's also that feeling of achievement of what I've gotten. So when you're talking about a move, it's, oh, yeah, I'm going to have to let go of my home and my community, and we're going to a new place, and it's going to be overwhelming. Recognizing that. First of all, starting from a place of recognizing it, and then saying, oh, well, what are some of the things that I might be able to do to help me lessen that overwhelm? It might be asking for some help. It might be saying, oh, you know, when I get to the new house, the new community, I'm going to see what the resources are there. You can even do it before you move.
Do you think that women have trouble asking for help?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think that's a big stumbling block. And I think that's part of also the expectation, the stereotype of that we're not allowed to ask for help. We're supposed to know it all. We're supposed to be that.
That was one thing I remember
mom.
you talking with Shannon about, the superwoman of doing everything, you know, having a career and doing this and looking like you just stepped off the pages of Vogue, all the while, you know, like the Ginger Rogers, you know, do everything twice as good as a male and do it backwards in high heels. You know, it's that concept that, you know, really, she may not exist.
And look at what an impossible ideal that is to live up to. And how if that's what we have in front of us, well, I can't do that. But another way of thinking about it, looking at it is, what can I do? And yeah, it is okay to ask for help. It is okay. In fact, not only is it okay, but it's an avenue of not only asking for help, but also being able to give help as well. That there's a lovely flow that can be created. That's relationship.
And I once heard from someone who was giving advice that sometimes to be a good friend and neighbor, you have to accept help as well as give it. That helps everybody feel important, and as they're giving stuff, that it's not just, you know, you always giving to somebody but saying, oh, no, when somebody wants to do to you, but accepting that help for people.
Well, think about it. If you're always giving help, and then you find yourself in a place of needing help, and yet you're restrained, afraid, not able to ask for that help, that can turn into resentment. How come I helped my neighbor and they're not helping me? Or in any other kind of situation. And that resentment can really fester and be, you know, quite detrimental in any situation, rather than feeling a flow of that. It's wonderful to give help. It's also wonderful to receive help.
Yeah. One thing that some of my friends and I are looking at now is impending retirement of our spouses. In most of the cases, either the woman had, as I did, became a stay-at-home mom and was able to not have to go back to work. Others worked part-time. Others already retired while the husband was still working, that sort of thing. But we're looking at that changing dynamic of now being just the two of you, which when you were first together would have sounded delightful. But after 30, 40 years, it's like, oh gosh, you're going to have them 24 hours a day. What are we going to do? And I think we have to recognize that the spouse is going to be going through a real transition too. If they've been working for 40, 50 or more years and now are going to be at home, that's a huge transition for people to be going through, both as individuals and as a couple.
It is.
I don't know how you prepare for it.
Well, I think by preparing for it, you're actually putting it out on the table. It's something that you talk about. It's something that, rather than stuffing it away, being in denial that it's happening or going to happen, talk about it. What does that mean? In fact, even thinking about any retirement for any of us, how much of our whole identity has been tied to what we've done in our career. And, oh, well, if there's a very disproportionate amount of work identity versus personal identity, that means hobbies, things you like to do, people you like to be with. Well, that retirement's going to be very, very hard if you're a workaholic. And that's all you've known. Oh, maybe understanding that. Is that how you want your retirement to be, and how would that translate? In what way would that
it goes back again to building your self-worth from within,
absolutely,
as opposed to the external. And looking at it, I guess, with your your spouse then too.
Absolutely. And your spouse needs that space. Here's the balance, or trying to get the balance, that you talk about things and work things out as a couple, but you're both two individual people. And so you each need your own space to also work that out internally for yourself. So your spouse needs his space to deal with that, to see, what is he letting go of? How does he have to, maybe he needs to do some grieving over that to get to...
That thing, I hadn't thought of that before.
Absolutely. We grieve a lot of things. And the idea of grieving is actually a healthy response to loss, to bring us to healing, to bring us to coming to a new place of being and understanding. And so it isn't just the loss of a loved one that we grieve, but of those major changes in our lives. And that could be certainly retirement.
No, I never thought of it in that way. One thing I have been trying to think about a lot lately for myself, with different changes that we've been through and things that I'm looking toward in the future, is the whole idea of looking at my life more as not with what I want to change, but what I'm so grateful for that we have. That whether it's, on the one hand, my family, on the other hand, well, there's some things that I've accomplished too that I can be very proud of and very grateful that I had the chance to do it. And I think sometimes we don't take a minute to say, wow, I really have a lot to be grateful for. Not just in an economic sense or, a monetary sense or something like that, but to stop and say, hey, I've become a pretty strong person over the years, and I can do these things, and I'm grateful that, looking back, that I was able to go through those things, that I think it took me a long time to get to a point where I could start to realize that, I guess, that there was that aspect of my life, to see. I mean, I know that there's also been books, various celebrities would have written about, gratitude and taking time every day to write in your journal about what you're grateful for. I'm not into that, but I'm not quite as contemplative a person to do that. But I do try to take the time to think.
Cultivating gratitude is really about choosing to be aware of the good things in your life, in your surroundings. So it could be as simple a thing as seeing a beautiful sunset and just feeling that and being really aware and grateful for it. Or being grateful for one's family, being grateful for one's opportunities, or being grateful for one's growth in what they've learned over the span of so many years. How we cultivate gratitude within ourselves will vary from person to person. So whatever we choose, it might be great for some person to journal. Some people like to walk or do yoga, or their whole variety of things, ways to cultivate gratitude. It's just choosing the one that fits for you.
It's, there's just so many facets of our lives that are just amazing when you think of it. I mean, when you think of just human life and what we do and what we can accomplish and what can happen over the years as individuals, and then that ripple effect through society of what happens. When you think about the women's role and the nurturing and all that we do, when you look at it, really, it doesn't stop at our house door. It goes out through society. And, I look around at town and see, all the people that do things for the town as volunteers. An awful lot of them are women. And they do an incredible job at all sorts of things. And it's really an outgrowth of that nurturing and caring attitude that they have, and how they've learned things through their lives that they can then go out and really help other people reshape what's going on around them and what they're doing. We're kind of at the end of our conversation now with what ways that we can renew ourselves and reshape our lives. And I was very impressed with the conversation that you had with Shannon a couple years ago, and I'm so glad you could do this today with me again. And we probably need to have another time together, because I think we've showed today that it certainly helps to take the time to review where you've been, give yourself renewed encouragement and energy, and reshape your life when necessary. And thank you so much, Susan, for talking with me today about the things that we can do to help us lead happy and worthwhile lives. And thanks to all of you who've joined us. And I hope you'll tune in again for another conversation on the Simsbury woman. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.